Any tips on good pathing? Like, what sort of pathing tips are you looking for? Killer specific, like mind game specific, ranged, any, just in general, because I suck. Gamer, that's a mood, man. That's a mood. I feel for you, gamer. All right. Can we do this mid-chase? A pathing discussion might be hard. Look, I need to go somewhere else. Although there's like nothing here. I think I have any resources. Oh, I do. So, as you watch me, especially playing against this guy, one thing you will find that I constantly do is look behind me, but not for prolonged periods of time like this, right? I quickly check to figure out where he is, what direction he's looking, how far he is, so then that way I can decide whether or not I want to play a pallet, go for a window, run past a playable tile to a different tile, because if I have enough distance on the killer, and this goes to like most killers, right? Especially like M1 killers. If I have a lot of distance on somebody and I look behind me, I'm like, oh, they're kind of far. I look forward and I'm like, okay, they're not a ranged killer, they're not a nurse, they're not a blight, they're not a singularity. I have enough distance on them. I can run from this pallet where I'm next to all the way to like this other tile. It helps if obviously you know what's in front of you, which like windows of opportunity can kind of help you with that. Skipping tiles or skipping pallets to run to a different one is really smart. It can kind of prolong chase a little bit. It can prolong bloodlust building. It can allow you a better chance to see what's around the map. And you should be able to commit to memory decently well. The pallets you have already passed, the windows you have already passed, the tiles. So then that way, if you decide to run back the same line you just took, you should know what's there. So in short, checking behind you every now and then to gauge distance, where the killer is, maybe if they're a ranged killer to kind of like see what they're doing with their power. Sometimes audio isn't the best indicator. It'll give you an idea of, should I stay or should I keep running forward? Should I hold W or should I like, oh, the killer's really close, I need to play this pallet. A lot of people obviously suggest, oh, you should get really good at looking behind you. Well, yes, you should, but it's more than just that. You need to get good at checking behind you periodically during chase and using that information to dictate your pathing and your looping distance. Obviously, one of the biggest suggestion I can give is hug things tight. Like you saw me hugging this seat earlier. You can run your character slightly into most objects without trouble, and you get to maintain your speed. It doesn't slow you down, unless you like run straight into something like this. So you gotta kind of get comfortable with a lot of like basic tiles in terms of like where that sweet spot is before you start running like too straight into it. Oh, this is unfortunate. Almost got that though. That's kind of obvious though. Some people don't understand why survivors run along things. To be fair, a lot of people just don't know, but killers' hitboxes are bigger. In almost every instance aside from like tier 1 Myers, a killer has a bigger hitbox than you. So if you're both, you and the killer are running, you know, with your body pressed along a wall or tile of any sort, debris, barrel, or otherwise, it takes you essentially less distance to go around that object than it does the killer. That's why, you know, a common concept of looping is to always hug the tile tight. Another good rule of thumb when it comes to like moving and panning your camera to check behind you is do it before you use a vault. Do it before you enter a tile. Do it before you use a vault like this. You always want to check to gauge the distance again of the killer. Maybe if they're kind of looking to like enter a tile a certain way. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, ooh, I want to do a window fake. Before you actually fake the window or decide to actually window vault, maybe you should make sure to see if the killer's even looking at you first. Because if the killer's not even watching you, and like, you know, maybe they're trying to mind game by, you know, walking backwards or whatever, having that knowledge of what the killer sees before you make a decision on whether or not to use a vault or to use a pallet or to just run inside of a tile where you'll lose line of sight, it's a good idea to know what the killer's looking at. And again, always gauging distance. After a while, it becomes like muscle memory. A lot of this does, yeah, for sure. And like some of it is a guessing game where you're trying to guess whether or not it's like, okay, well, DBD's hitboxes and ping can be kind of wild, so I think I can make another loop around Shack. I think I can make it to this pallet. Some of it is kind of guessing work, which is fine. Going back a little bit to sometimes why I like to skip tiles and, you know, hold W to another one. For people that are kind of just starting the game, one thing I like to kind of have them try to do is treat every map like comp players kind of do this sort of. Treat the map like a big circle or a big clock or a big square, however it's shaped. Plan on running around the map if the killer's chasing you, and like skip every other tile. So then that way, like let's say for instance, you play tile 1, you skip tile 2, you go to tile 3, you skip tile 4, you go to tile 5, and maybe you threw like almost every other palette for the tiles you played. What you can do is you can run half the map, or you know, the full map, and then you know you can do another circle or double back and play all those tiles again, having the knowledge and assurance that you know how they're set up. You should know what pallets are thrown if you're the only one that's been in chase. So you can kind of like play the clock clockwise and then counterclockwise. Clockwise and counterclockwise. And you can kind of go back and forth utilizing the windows as a resource that you've already played or you've already seen. And then you can utilize those pallets, whether you're going to throw them or just mind game them, that, again, you've already seen. As opposed to playing most maps, like most people do, where a lot of, like, beginning survivors, they panic. They're just like, oh my god, a pallet. I gotta throw it. I gotta stay here. I gotta throw it. Look behind you, gauge distance. Maybe you don't want to play this tile. Maybe it's not safe. Maybe you're not comfortable playing LTs. Maybe you know if you skip this LT tile with a little bit of line of sight manipulation, make it to Shack. Maybe you're more comfortable playing Shack. And then I guess maybe, like, that's a lot in and of itself. I guess one of the last things I'd probably say for pathing is, I just referenced it, line of sight. Line of sight, mind gaming, line of sight manipulation is so important. The killers use it all the time. They'll use like a break in line of sight to sometimes do what's called stain manipulation, where they'll walk backwards, hide their stain, mind game, try and get you to think like, oh, they're running the other way when they're really running towards you, but backwards because you can't see the red stain. You can do the same thing as a survivor. If you have a pretty like good understanding of how far the killer is from you, where they are, how their power works, you can use line of sight to manipulate them in thinking that you want to play certain tiles, that you want to go for certain window vaults, a sandbag, and you can use those line of sight breaks to your benefit. Good reference is Nurse. I mean, that's the one thing survivors almost always instinctively do against Nurse, is try and use a line of sight breaks where the Nurse doesn't see you to maybe change up your pathing. Hopefully you got all that though. I mean, it's like, if I had to make like a checklist of things you could, you know, work on, camera work, do check behind you during chase, not stare behind you during chase, hugging tiles tightly, using the distance you have on the killer to kind of explore the map as much as possible and skip tiles, so that way you kind of like know how the map's set up, and use line of sight. Use line of sight to your benefit. Use breakers in line of sight to help mind game. Make, you know, you start running one way because the killer can see you, then as soon as you break line of sight, it's like, oh, well, I have, you know, a wall for a while, and I can either go left or right. Try and use that to your advantage and think to yourself, well, if I was the killer, I'd probably go this way because that would make the most sense, but maybe I'll go this way. Observe how Civ plays for a while. Yeah, it can be tough. Like, there was like a couple games ago, I was gonna reference it, but it's hard to explain without being in game. But oftentimes, if I go towards a pallet and I want to leave the tile because it's not a really strong pallet, what I might do if I have enough distance on the killer is I'll run through the pallet, allow the killer to take control of it, which can be risky, because if you're playing a shit pallet that doesn't have very long sides, and you give the killer the control of the pallet, they essentially have control of that tile. They can double back, and then as soon as you kind of mess up, they can usually get a hit on you. So what I might do is I'm like, okay, I plan on leaving this tile. I'm going to give the killer a pallet. Now, if they're not tall enough, and they're thinking, oh, nice, he gave me the pallet, I can mind game this. A lot of them will. So I will stare behind my character to the point where they enter the pallet, and if that pallet is a big enough line of sight blocker to where they don't see me, I might instantly be running to the next tile. Because if they hesitate for even a second, or try and mind game the palette thinking I want to play it, and they do a little double back, I'm already gone. I'm already gone and on to the next tile. I might break Bloodlust. I might make it to a stronger tile. So that's another thing that you might want to take into consideration in terms of like what people call filler palettes or shit palettes, and giving the killer the palette at those tiles. If you intend to play the palette and you want to throw it and stay there, don't give it to the killer. Stay underneath it, walk back and forth, not sprinting, and try and kind of like gauge on, you know, like, 'cause a lot of them will just double back over and over and over again. You can hold there, you can sit there and hold the pallet and wait for them to maybe make a decision and swing, and you might be able to get a stun on them without getting hit. But that's what I would always suggest when it comes to those unsafe pallets, is if you feel comfortable running away and you don't want to play it, give them the pallet, use line of sight to run. If you plan on playing it, you want to throw it, you feel like you need to stun them, stay there, but don't give them the pallet. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I could sit here and talk about it, and you're like, wow, like, he knows a lot about DBD. A lot of it is just instinctual. Once you've done something 1,000+ times for 1,000+ hours, you kind of do it without thinking about it. Because DBD, in general, all DBD is from, like, a survivor POV, is putting as much distance between you and the killer as possible in the safest way as possible and not cornering yourself like in the map. The more frequently during chase you can get to like safe tiles that are like near the center of the map, the more opportunities you have to run to other safer tiles. The better you'll be at looping. The problem you run into is like a lot of the killers nowadays are very anti-loop. They're very good at zoning. And they don't really require much mechanical skill on, like, you know, the point of the killer. Some of them are. They do have, like, a lot of potential to be very, very mechanically skilled, but sometimes you don't really need to do that in order to get downs. Yo, mama doesn't require much mechanical skill. Pidgey. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Pidgey. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Not be aware of this. But when it comes to the wives, I am untouchable. I am untouchable. I have a cloak, a shroud, if you will, encasing my entire existence. I am immune to wife persecution. I'm serious. It's something about my charm, I fear. Ugh.